Oh, it's funny, isn't it? How someone can walk into your life like they're the sun itself, lighting up every dark corner you didn't even know existed, and then just vanish. One moment, you're convinced that forever was stitched into every laugh, every glance, every quiet moment between breaths. And the next, the words hit you like a cold slap to the face. Goodbye, not tomorrow, not later, not we'll figure it out, just goodbye. And suddenly the world doesn't feel like it belongs to you anymore. It's heavier, quieter, sharper. You start noticing the echoes of their absence in the spaces where their presence used to live, in the way the air feels different when you inhale, in the way the sun seems less warm, and the night somehow more mocking. And the truth is, you don't just lose them. You lose the version of yourself that existed only because they were there. Every plan, every dream, every hope that once had their smile woven into it feels like it's been ripped out, leaving a hollow that screams louder than any words ever toward accepting reality. It's a funny thing, isn't it? How stubbornly people cling to illusions, to dreams stitched together with hope and denial, how they insist that what they feel will last forever. That the person they love will remain tethered to their life like some permanent fixture. A sun that will never set. But reality doesn't care about feelings. It doesn't bend for wishes. It doesn't negotiate with longing. Reality is indifferent, brutal, and relentless. And when someone leaves, when the words goodbye are spoken, the illusion shatters. It's not a polite parting, not a gentle fade. It's a jagged, tearing force that rips through everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you controlled. And in that moment, accepting it feels impossible because your mind screams for another ending, for a rewrite, for a miracle that will erase absence and restore warmth. You clutch at memories like they're lifelines, replay conversations for hidden meanings, score gestures for a missed signal, because the human mind hates the void. It hates nothingness. It hates the truth that sometimes things are simply over, that permanence is a myth, that attachment is fragile, that love can be both luminous and transient. Acceptance doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't knock on the door with polite announcements. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow in the corner of your vision, whispering truths you don't want to hear. First, it manifests as denial you insist they'll return. That the goodbye was temporary, that light will bend back toward them, that the universe will right itself. If you just wait long enough, you examine every detail, replay every smile, every touch, every promise, trying to find a reason to hope, to claim that permanence, to defy the cruel rules of reality. But the longer you linger in denial, the more reality tightens its grip. It doesn't negotiate, it doesn't care about fairness, it doesn't indulge your fantasies. It simply exists, unchanged, relentless, indifferent, and eventually the denial begins to crack. A fissure spreading across your stubborn mind, letting in a sliver of truth. They're gone, the moment is gone, and the world, this absurd, laughing, chaotic world, does not stop for grief and grief. Oh, grief is a teacher of sorts, but it's a harsh one. It forces you to confront the truth you don't want to see, the reality you resist, the fragility you ignore. You feel the absence like a weight pressing into your chest, a cold, relentless reminder that what you thought was permanent was temporary, that what you loved could be taken away without explanation, that life doesn't pause for heartbreak. Acceptance begins as pain, as rage, as bewilderment, as the gnawing understanding that nothing is owed to you, that existence moves on with no regard for the fragile illusions of attachment. And in that pressure, in that grinding weight, something begins to shift. You start to see that holding on to denial only prolongs suffering, that clinging to what is no longer there doesn't summon them back, doesn't restore warmth, doesn't bring back laughter or touch. You start to understand that reality doesn't negotiate with longing, doesn't pause for tears, doesn't wait for reconciliation. And the strange thing about acceptance is that it isn't a single, sweeping moment of clarity. It is jagged, fragmented, chaotic. It creeps in during small ways, in the silence where their voice used to be, in the spaces between heartbeats where their presence once lived, in the realization that the world continues even as you feel hollow. It whispers that life moves on, indifferent and unrelenting, that attachment is a fragile thread easily broken, that love is volatile and impermanent, and that the first step to surviving this chaos is acknowledging the truth without decoration, without excuses, without illusions. You begin to confront the emptiness, the void, the absence, and in doing so, you understand that the power of reality lies in its indifference, that strength is forged not in control, but in endurance, that resilience is not cultivated by denial, but by honest confrontation with what is, and there is a liberation in this confrontation, a dark sort of freedom. The shackles of illusion fall away when you finally see the truth without flinching, when you recognize that permanence was never promised, that attachment is a gamble, that love is a fleeting, combustible force. You begin to understand that acceptance doesn't mean joy, doesn't mean closure, doesn't mean forgiveness, doesn't mean peace. Acceptance simply means seeing the world as it is, feeling the pain as it is, acknowledging absence as it is, and realizing that you still exist in the aftermath, that the heart continues to beat even when it is broken, that the mind continues to function even when it is haunted by memory, that life continues to march forward even when you are forced to watch the sun set on what you loved. And as this jagged, uncomfortable awareness settles, as denial dissolves and grief sharpens into clarity, you begin to see patterns you couldn't before. You see how attachment is formed, how illusions are built, how hope can deceive, how love can illuminate and devastate simultaneously. You see how fragile human connection is, how unpredictable, how chaotic, and how relentlessly beautiful and destructive it can be. Acceptance, in its rawest, cruelest form, is the acknowledgement that life is not designed to comfort, that permanence is a fiction, that heartbreak is inevitable, that survival is optional but necessary, and that enduring reality is a conscious, repeated choice, a jagged affirmation that the world is indifferent, that loss is inevitable, that absence is absolute, and that through all this you are forced to reckon with what remains, yourself, fractured, aware, and defiantly existing. You realize that accepting reality is not about erasing the past, not about pretending absence isn't painful, not about denying the sharp edges of memory. It is about seeing the world with unflinching eyes, about embracing chaos without flinching, about holding the hollow spaces inside you without surrendering to them, about understanding that attachment, loss, love, absence, grief, and survival are all intertwined, woven into the same unpredictable, jagged tapestry of existence, that life moves forward with or without your consent, and that the first step in reclaiming power is acknowledging that reality doesn't care, reality doesn't negotiate, and the only thing you control is how you endure, how you feel, how you continue to exist, jagged, fractured, and unrepentantly alive, embracing chaos. It's one of the cruelest lessons life teaches, the kind you don't see coming until it's already wrapped its jagged fingers around your chest and squeezed until you can barely breathe. Chaos doesn't knock politely, it doesn't give warnings, it doesn't offer excuses. It crashes in, loud, relentless, absurd, and suddenly everything you thought you controlled, everything you relied on, everything you trusted, becomes a fragile, laughing illusion. And the human mind, it wants structure, it craves rules, it demands reason. We try to categorize, rationalize, label, tame the storm, but chaos laughs at all of it. It twists what was familiar into something strange, distorts the ordinary into reminders of how unpredictable life can be, and forces you to confront a truth you've been avoiding, that nothing is permanent, nothing is guaranteed, nothing is safe. You start noticing it in subtle ways first. A missed call that was never returned, a smile that felt different, a glance that lingered too briefly, a silence that speaks louder than words. Chaos doesn't arrive with fanfare, it whispers, it lingers, it grows, until it's impossible to ignore, until the walls you've built around your life start to crumble, revealing the fragility that's always been there, waiting for the right storm to expose it. And the strange beauty of chaos is that it forces introspection, though no one ever asks for it politely. It makes you look at yourself, at your choices, at your attachment, at the illusions you've nurtured, like fragile glass figurines You realize how much you relied on people, on circumstances, on hope itself, and how little control you truly had. The mind rebels, naturally, because no one likes to admit that control is a myth, that certainty is a lie, that permanence is an illusion. You replay events in your head, trying to stitch together a narrative that makes sense, trying to assign blame, searching for patterns that aren't there, searching for a reason, a logic, a structure to explain the chaos that has upended your world. But chaos doesn't explain itself, it doesn't justify, it doesn't negotiate. It exists as it wills, and you are left to navigate it, untethered, unprepared, exposed. And in that exposure, in that raw confrontation with unpredictability, there's a strange, jagged kind of awareness. You begin to see the rules you thought governed life were arbitrary, that the universe is indifferent to suffering, and that survival, real survival, is not about predicting what comes next, but enduring what comes without flinching. And the emotions, the emotions, they're a symphony of contradictions. Fear, anger, grief, longing, despair, exhilaration at realizing the absurdity of it all tangled together, impossible to separate, impossible to organize, impossible to tame. You feel the sharp edge of pain like a blade pressed to your skin, and yet within that, there's a perverse clarity. Chaos forces honesty. It strips away pretenses, illusions, polite facades, revealing raw human nature, vulnerability, desire, fragility, resilience, stubbornness, obsession, courage, and a relentless, compulsive drive to continue existing even when the world seems determined to tear itself apart. And you begin to understand that chaos is both destructive and instructive. It shows you the limits of control, the fragility of attachment, the absurdity of expectations, the unpredictability of human behavior, the fleeting nature of connection, the inevitability of loss, and the relentless, absurd, ironic persistence of life, which keeps moving even when everything you relied on collapses. And amidst this relentless turbulence, you discover patterns you hadn't noticed before. Not patterns in the sense of control or comfort, but in the sense of rhythm, of repetition, of survival. Chaos forces you to notice resilience where it hides, in the smallest gestures, the tiniest decisions, the subtle movements of the heart that keep you alive. You notice how the mind adapts, how the body endures, how grief transforms into awareness, how fear sharpens perception, how anger fuels motion, how despair teaches endurance. You begin to realize that chaos is not just an external force. It is internal as well. The mind generates it. The heart amplifies it. Memory sustains it. Longing intensifies it. Within that same chaos, there is an opportunity, a twisted little chance to discover who you are without the scaffolding of expectation, without the comfort of predictability, without the illusions you once clung to. You start to see yourself jagged, raw, unpredictable, alive, as chaotic as the world around you. In that reflection, there's a strange, unpolished liberation, and liberation, of course, isn't gentle. It doesn't arrive with a pat on the back or a comforting smile. It arrives in the form of stark awareness that control is a lie, that attachment is fragile, that love is volatile, that people leave, that absence is inevitable, that life moves on regardless, that permanence is a myth, that survival is optional but essential. It arrives as the recognition that your response to chaos is the only agency you truly possess, that endurance is a decision repeated moment by moment, that self-awareness is forged in the crucible of unpredictability, that resilience is cultivated in the face of relentless uncertainty, and that through all of this, through fear and pain and absurdity and grief, you begin to feel a perverse kind of power, the power to face reality without flinching, to navigate the storm without illusions, to witness the absurdity without surrender, to exist jagged, fractured, unpredictable, and alive, knowing that chaos will always come again, and that you will meet it unbroken, learning, enduring, laughing at the absurdity of it all, feeling everything, knowing everything, surviving everything, recognizing the power and fragility of attachment, Now that's a joke the universe plays on everyone. We think we're strong, we think we're independent, we think we're in control of our hearts, our lives, our choices, but then someone walks in, smiles at you, laughs with you, and suddenly all of that disappears like smoke in the wind. Attachment is funny, it whispers, promises, offers illusions of permanence, convinces you that you are essential to someone else, a story, that they are essential to yours, that together you can hold the chaos at bay, and for a while, maybe even a long while, it feels like truth. You build routines, you make plans, you carve out memories, you stitch together a fragile little world that feels safe, anchored, certain. But here's the cruel part. Attachment is fragile, precarious, a delicate filament stretched across the void. And all it takes is one word, one glance, one silence, and the filament snaps, and you find yourself plummeting into an absence you didn't see coming. And it's not just about losing someone, is it? It's about realizing how much of yourself you handed over, how many pieces you offered, how many corners of your being depended on someone else to validate existence. Attachment is a trap disguised as warmth, a cage dressed in comfort, a thrill masquerading as security. You feel tethered, bound, reliant, and when the thread frays, the tether snaps. The cage opens, you're left exposed, naked to the chaos you thought you could escape. And the mind, oh the mind, it revolts. It screams at you to understand, to negotiate, to fix, to reclaim, to undo what has already been done. You replay moments over and over, searching for cracks, for warning signs, for mistakes you made, for any justification that might explain the fracture. And sometimes there is none. Sometimes attachment breaks, not because of betrayal, not because of failure, not because of malice, but because reality has no loyalty, because hearts are unpredictable, because people are volatile, because life doesn't pause for longing, and yet within the jagged edges of this fragility, there's a lesson hiding, laughing quietly. You start to understand that attachment, while powerful, is not synonymous with control. You realize that being tethered to someone else's presence, being dependent on their attention, their affection, their affirmation, is an illusion of power. The more you rely on it, the more vulnerable you become. The more you depend on it, the more chaos can infiltrate your life, uninvited, unrelenting, indifferent. And suddenly, the fragility isn't just theirs, it's yours too. Your heart, your trust, your desire, your expectation, your love, every piece of it is exposed. And you see with a perverse clarity that strength is not in attachment, but in understanding the peril of attachment, in recognizing the volatility inherent in loving and being loved, in realizing that every connection carries within it the seeds of potential absence, the possibility of rupture, the inevitability of change, and the irony. Oh, the irony of attachment is delicious in its cruelty. The very thing that makes life luminous, that gives it meaning, that sparks joy and warmth and hope, is the same thing that makes life unbearable, that exposes you to grief, to heartbreak, to absence, and the mind struggles to reconcile it. We cling, we grasp, we hold, thinking permanence is possible, think safety is guaranteed, thinking love is a shelter from chaos, and yet, all the while, attachment itself is a tightrope stretched over nothingness. A fragile thread above the yawning void of unpredictability, and walking that tightrope, balancing hope and fear, desire and dread, joy and vulnerability, you begin to understand the delicate, absurd dance that is loving, that is trusting, that is depending on another human being, and the beauty of recognizing this fragility, paradoxically, is that it gives a strange kind of freedom. When you see the truth of attachment, when you acknowledge its precariousness, when you understand the volatile power it wields, you begin to move differently. You begin to hold lightly, to love without chains, to invest without surrendering autonomy, to care without losing yourself, to trust without expecting permanence, to give without demanding reciprocity. You begin to see that the heart can be full even in the absence of guarantee, that connection can exist even in the shadow of impermanence, that intimacy is possible even when chaos lurks nearby, that strength lies not in clinging but in awareness, not in possession but in perception. not in control but in understanding. The raw, unpredictable, absurd force that is human attachment, and with that understanding, you start to see patterns, not the predictable, comforting ones we wish for, but the jagged, unpredictable rhythms of connection and loss, of desire and withdrawal, of presence and absence. You see how hearts collide, intertwine, fray, and separate, how people enter and exit, how love blooms and withers, how trust is built and broken, how longing can illuminate and devastate simultaneously. And through this awareness, you start to navigate your own attachments with precision, with attention, with awareness, noticing how dependence makes you vulnerable, how detachment sharpens perception, how love can both anchor and fracture, how connection is beautiful because it is perilous, how caring deeply is a risk, a gamble, a tightrope above a yawning chasm where the stakes are your heart, your hope, your joy, your despair, and your existence, all intertwined, all fragile, all absurdly, achingly human. And in this navigation, this delicate, chaotic awareness, you start to feel the pulse of reality, that attachment will always carry risk, that love will always carry vulnerability, that hearts are volatile, the absence is inevitable, that chaos is constant, that joy and pain are inseparable, that longing is both fuel and trap, that the world moves on without mercy, without pause, without concern, and that through it all, the only thing you truly control is how you hold your heart, how you perceive attachment, how you survive its fragility, how you endure its power, how you laugh at its cruelty, how you learn, how you continue, jagged, aware, exposed, alive, human, and irreparably engaged in the absurd dance of connection and loss, learning to survive and find strength in absence. Now that's the cruel punchline life loves to deliver. You think you have it all figured out, love, companionship, trust, presence, but then it's ripped away with a word, a gesture, silence, and suddenly you're left staring into the void, feeling the echo of a soul that once mattered more than air itself. Absence is a teacher without mercy. It doesn't sugarcoat, it doesn't wait, it doesn't console, it presses, it lingers, it hollows you out until you're forced to confront the uncomfortable, undeniable truth. The world keeps moving even when you're broken, even when your heart screams for what was stolen, even when the laughter and warmth that once defined your days has vanished. And survival isn't heroic, it isn't glorious, isn't cinematic, it's raw, jagged, unpolished. It's about continuing to exist while the world has forgotten your name, about breathing when every fiber of your being longs to stop, about feel every fragment of pain and still managing to put one foot in front of the other. You begin to notice how absence transforms perception. What once felt ordinary now stings with a sharpness you hadn't imagined. Every corner of your world carries their imprint, the chair they used to sit in, the mug they always held. They told you God whispers softly, like a polite guest knocking once and walking away if you don't answer. But that's not how it happens, is it? Sometimes it's loud, uncomfortable, crawling under your skin at the worst possible moment, right when the world expects you to smile and nod and keep playing your part. Sometimes the message doesn't come with peace or poetry, it comes with pressure, with a weight on your chest that says, listen now, not later. Not when it's convenient. And the strangest part isn't hearing it. It's realizing you weren't chosen because you're special, but because you're cracked enough to hear something slip through it. Never shows up politely, never clears its throat or waits for permission. It barges in while you're busy pretending everything makes sense. While you're laughing at the right moments and nodding along like you understand the rules of the room. 1 second you're fine, or at least fine enough to function. And the next, there's this pressure, this sudden awareness that something has shifted, and you didn't sign any paperwork for it. That's how it starts, not with thunder or angels or comfort, but with interruption, with a sharp tap on the inside of your skull that says stop pretending you didn't hear that. People love the idea of being called, but they imagine it happened on a mountain with clear instructions and a reward at the end. What they don't talk about is how disruptive it is, how inconvenient it feels, how badly timed it always seems to be, because the voice doesn't wait for your schedule to open up. It doesn't care that you were in the middle of surviving, that you finally had things under control, or at least taped together well enough to pass inspection. It cuts through like laughter in a funeral, wrong, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. And once it's there, everything else starts to sound fake. Conversations feel rehearsed, routines feel hollow, and suddenly you're aware of how much noise exists just to keep people from hearing anything real. You try to drown it out at first, turn up the volume on distraction, on responsibilities, on excuses, because listening means something might be required of you. And that's terrifying in a way. Chaos never was. The interruption doesn't feel holy. It feels invasive. It feels like someone rearranged the furniture in your mind without asking, and now you keep bumping into thoughts you didn't place there. You start questioning things you were comfortable with 5 minutes ago. You start seeing cracks in beliefs you defended your whole life. And the worst part is how quiet it is. No dramatic soundtrack, no witnesses. Just you and this persistent awareness that something is asking for your attention, and it's not going to leave just because you ignore it. People think the hard part is hearing the voice, but that's the easy part. The hard part is what it interrupts, the plans it derails, the identity it pokes holes in. You realize pretty quickly that this kind of interruption doesn't come to people who are completely asleep. It comes when you're alert enough to notice and tired enough to crack, when you're just self-aware enough to feel the discomfort, but not strong enough to immediately shut it down. That's why it feels cruel. You weren't ready, you were never going to be ready, and it showed up anyway. And now you're stuck with it, walking around with a secret disturbance behind your eyes, smiling at people who have no idea your internal script has been rewritten without your consent. Every normal moment starts to feel staged after that. You hear jokes and wonder why they sound rehearsed. You watch people chase applause and notice how desperate it looks from the outside. You follow rules and suddenly see how fragile they are, how much they rely on everyone agreeing not to question them. The interruption doesn't give you answers. It gives you awareness. And awareness is dangerous because it ruins the comfort of ignorance. You can't go back to the person you were before that moment. The one who could sleep through the noise and call it peace. And the strange thing is how personal it feels, like it knows exactly when to strike, exactly which illusion to puncture first. It doesn't interrupt your strengths, it interrupts your lies, the ones you told yourself to get through the day, the ones that kept you functional but small. It presses on the sore spots, the doubts you never said out loud, and suddenly those doubts aren't whispers anymore. They're standing right in front of you, arms crossed, waiting for you to acknowledge them. You start to understand that this wasn't about comfort or reassurance. It was about disruption, about shaking you out of autopilot, about forcing you to listen in a world that never stops talking. And once that interruption happens, once that voice cuts through the static, everything becomes louder and quieter at the same time. Louder because you notice the absurdity, the contradictions, the performances. Quieter because underneath all of it, there's this steady insistence that won't raise its volume, won't argue, won't beg. It just stays there, waiting for you to stop running from it, waiting for you to admit that you heard it the first time, and every time after that, waiting for you to sit with the discomfort instead of numbing it, waiting for you to accept that some interruptions aren't meant to be fixed or explained or shared. They're meant to change the direction you were walking in, even if you don't know where that direction leads, even if it costs you the version of yourself that fits so nicely into the noise. Even if all you can do right now is stand there, aware, unsettled, listening, because it already interrupted you once, and it's not going to apologize for doing it again and again until you finally stop pretending that you didn't notice the moment everything shifted and the silence started staring back at you, asking what you're going to do with it now, asking whether you're brave enough to let the interruption keep interrupting, to let it peel back layer after layer of what you thought was stable until all that's left is this raw attention, this uncomfortable clarity. This sense that something real has entered the room. It doesn't care if you're ready. It doesn't care if you're afraid. It just waits, patient and sharp, right there in the middle of your thoughts, right where you can't unhear it, right where it keeps tapping, reminding you that it spoke, that it cut in, that it changed the rhythm, and that pretending otherwise is just another kind of noise, another distraction, another joke. You tell yourself to avoid facing the fact that the interruption already happened, and you're still standing here, pretending you don't feel it vibrating under everything you say and do and think and choose, because you do, and it's still there, pressing, interrupting, refusing to fade, refusing to resolve, just sitting in the space it created, waiting for you to finally admit that you're listening and that nothing feels the same anymore, and maybe it never was supposed to. And maybe this is where it actually begins, right in the middle of the disruption, right in the moment where you stop trying to smooth it over and just let it sit there unfinished, uncomfortable, real, like a thought that won't let you sleep, like a laugh that catches in your throat, like an interruption that doesn't want closure, doesn't want applause, doesn't want an ending, just your attention right now, while everything else keeps talking, and you finally realize you can hear it over the noise, and you're still here, still listening, still interrupted, still awake, still not done with what it started, still feeling that pressure build, still standing in that gap where the old rhythm broke and something else is waiting to take its place, something that doesn't explain itself, something that doesn't wrap things up neatly, something that just keeps going, pushing, asking, interrupting, right here, right now, without stopping, without ending, without letting you off the hook, without giving you the comfort of a full stop, without ever really finishing, because it wasn't meant to finish. It was meant to stay with you, inside you, unsettling you, interrupting you. Every time you try to pretend that moment didn't matter, every time you try to move on like nothing happened, every time you try to ignore the fact that the voice cut in and you heard it, and now it's still there, breathing in the background, waiting, watching, interrupting again and again and again, as long as it takes, as long as you keep listening, as long as you don't turn away, as long as that interruption keeps echoing through everything you thought you understood, everything you thought was stable, everything you thought was finished, because it isn't, it never was, and it's not going to end here, not with a clean line. Not with relief, not with silence, just this ongoing awareness. Unfinished pressure, this open space where the interruption lives and keeps living and keeps speaking without ever needing to say goodbye or wrap itself up or give you the satisfaction of an ending, just staying there, alive, unresolved, right where you can't escape it. Right where it keeps tapping quietly, persistently, endlessly, like it knows you're still listening. You always will be, even when you pretend you're not, even when you smile, even when you move forward, even now, even here, even as the words keep going and don't stop and don't close and don't end and don't give you that final breath of relief, because that's not how interruptions work. They don't end. They linger. They stay. They follow you. They become part of you. They keep pressing from the inside, reminding you that you were never supposed to go back to the way things were before the moment it spoke, and everything cracked open just enough for you to hear it, and not be able to forget it, and not be able to finish it, and not be able to close it, and not be able to stop listening ever again, because the interruption already owns that space now, and it's not letting go, not now, not like this, not with a neat ending, not with a full stop, just this ongoing hum, this unresolved tension, this awareness that keeps circling, keeps breathing, keeps interrupting, keeps existing right there, without ending, without closure, without silence, just going, just staying, just pressing, just listening, just there, still interrupting, still alive, still unfinished, still real, still happening, still not done, still not over, still not ending. Still at first it feels like a gift. This idea of knowing something others don't, like you've been handed a backstage pass to reality while everyone else is still clapping at the front of the stage. You think knowledge will make you lighter, sharper, stronger, but it doesn't take long to realize it adds weight instead of lifting it. Ignorance is easy because it lets you sleep. You don't question the script. You don't replay conversations in your head. You don't feel that quiet pressure sitting on your chest when the room goes silent. But once you listen, once you really hear something that changes how you see things, you don't get the luxury of unknowing it. That's when listening stops feeling like wisdom and starts feeling like a sentence you have. To carry around the burden isn't dramatic. It's subtle, almost boring in how constant it is. It shows up when people are laughing and you're calculating what they're avoiding. It shows up when someone gives advice that sounds confident but feels hollow and you have to bite your tongue because correcting them wouldn't help. It would just isolate you faster. Listening turns you into a quiet observer in rooms full of loud certainty. Everyone else is trading opinions like currency, confident they're rich, while you are standing there, holding something heavier than money, something you can't spend, without losing it. And the strange thing is how lonely it becomes. People think being aware means being superior, but it mostly means being alone with your thoughts while everyone else is distracted. You start to realize how much of the world runs on comfortable lies and how fragile people get when those lies are threatened. So you learn restraint not because you're kind, but because you're tired. Tired of explaining, tired of watching faces change when you say too much, tired of being looked at like you broke the mood instead of pointed at the crack in the wall. Everyone agreed to ignore. Listening makes you responsible in a way ignorance never does. When you don't know, you can blame circumstances, systems, other people. When you do know, even a little, you feel complicit every time you stay silent and exposed every time you speak. There's no winning move, just different kinds of loss. Speak and you become a problem. Stay quiet and you become a container, holding things that grow heavier the longer they're kept inside. That's the burden, not the information itself, but the constant choice of what to do with it. Knowing every option costs something. You start noticing how people chase certainty, like it's comfort food, quick filling and empty. They want answers that don't disturb them, truths that don't demand change. And once you've listened, really listened, you can't unsee how shallow that hunger is. You don't envy them anymore, not exactly, but you miss the simplicity. You miss being able to agree without hesitation, to commit without doubt, move forward without that voice in your head asking uncomfortable questions. Listening replaces clarity with depth. And depth is exhausting because it never lets you settle. There's also this quiet resentment that creeps in, not toward others, but toward yourself. You didn't ask to hear more. You didn't volunteer for the wait. Yet here you are, carrying it anyway. You catch yourself wishing you could turn it off just for a day, just to feel light, just to laugh, without the aftertaste of awareness. But even that wish feels dishonest, because you know you wouldn't trade it back if you really had the choice. The burden hurts, but it also sharpens. And part of you knows that dullness would be worse. Listening forces you to slow down while the world rushes past. You hesitate where others charge ahead. You question where others obey. That hesitation looks like weakness from the outside, but inside it feels like tension, like standing on a wire stretched between what is easy and what is true. And the longer you listen, the heavier that wire feels under your feet. Not because it's going to snap, but because it never lets you forget you're balancing, never lets you relax into the illusion that everything is simple and fine and settled. The burden also teaches you restraint in strange ways. You learn that not every truth needs an audience. Some things are too sharp to throw into a crowd. Some things change meaning the moment they're spoken aloud. So you carry them quietly, stacking them inside yourself layer after layer until you start to feel older than your age, heavier than your body, like you've been carrying something invisible for so long it's reshaped. How you stand, how you listen, how you look at people who are still light enough to joke about things you can't unhear. And that's when you understand that listening isn't about information, it's about endurance, about how much weight you can carry without collapsing into bitterness or arrogance, about how long you can sit with unresolved thoughts without needing to dump them on someone else just to feel relief. The burden isn't meant to crush you, but it will if you treat it casually. It demands discipline, patience, and a kind of quiet strength that doesn't get applause because no one sees it working. Everyone notices the loud confidence of ignorance, but almost no one notices the silent effort it takes to listen and keep going anyway. So you walk through the world differently, slower, more measured, aware that every step is heavier now, that every choice echoes a little longer. You stop chasing the comfort of certainty and start tolerating the discomfort of awareness. And even though some days it feels unfair, some days it feels suffocating, you keep listening, because ignoring it would be easier but emptier, because the burden, as heavy as it is, reminds you that you're awake, that you are present, that you're carrying something real in a world that prefers things light, disposable, and loud. And even when it feels like too much, even when your shoulders ache under the weight of knowing, you keep holding it, not because it makes you better, but because setting it down would mean pretending you never heard anything at all, and you know you did, and that knowledge sits there heavy and unmovable, asking you to keep going, to keep listening, to keep carrying it forward without expecting relief, without expecting resolution, without expecting anyone to understand, just continuing under the weight, step by step, thought by thought, breath by breath, with that quiet pressure reminding you that ignorance may be bliss, but listening is a responsibility. You can't walk away from once it's settled inside you and refuses to leave and keeps pressing and keeps shaping you and keeps demanding that you stay aware even when it hurts and even when it costs you comfort. And even when the burden feels heavier than silence and heavier than doubt and heavier than pretending, because once you've listened, really listened, the weight becomes part of you and you carry it not toward an ending, not toward relief, but forward into whatever comes next. Still holding it, still feeling it, still listening. Imagine being chosen like it's a spotlight moment, like the room goes quiet and everyone finally sees you the way you always wanted to be seen. But that's a fantasy made for people who need applause to believe something matters. The reality is colder. Being chosen feels less like standing on a stage and more like being moved a few steps away from everyone else without anyone noticing. Nothing dramatic changes on the outside, but inside there's this subtle shift, like the temperature dropped, and no one else feels it. You're still in the crowd, still smiling, still playing your role, but you're no longer standing in the same place as everyone else. Isolation doesn't arrive loudly either. It slips in through understanding. The moment you start seeing patterns other people ignore, the moment you hear meaning where others hear noise, you start drifting, not because you want to, but because connection is built on shared blindness as much as shared experience. People bond over what they don't question. When you question it, even silently, you're already a little outside the circle. You laugh a second later than everyone else. You hesitate before agreeing. You notice when enthusiasm feels forced, and those tiny delays add up until you're present but separate, involved but distant. Being chosen strips away the comfort of blending in. You realize how much safety there is in being just another face, another opinion, another voice repeating what everyone else already believes. Once you're chosen, that safety erodes. You can't fully lean into group certainty anymore because it feels thin, rehearsed, fragile. And people sense that. They might not know why, but they feel it. Something about you doesn't quite settle. You're not as easy to categorize, not as predictable, not as reassuring. So they keep you close, but not too close, included, but not trusted with the deeper things. There's a loneliness that comes from carrying awareness without validation. You can't explain it without sounding arrogant or unstable. If you speak about it, people hear ego or delusion. If you stay silent, they assume nothing's changed. Either way, you're alone with it. And that's the part no one romanticizes. Being chosen means sitting with questions that don't get answered, with responsibilities that don't come with instructions, with a sense of direction that doesn't have a map. You're expected to walk forward without being able to explain why you're walking or where you're going. The isolation sharpens your perception. You start watching people instead of joining them. You notice how often confidence replaces understanding, how often noise replaces meaning. You see how desperately people cling to roles because roles are easier than truth. And once you see that it's hard to unsee, you can't just drop back into the performance without feeling like you're lying to yourself. So you stay half a step back, observing, absorbing, carrying something that makes casual participation feel dishonest, and there is this quiet resentment that creeps in, not because you think you're bare, but because you didn't ask for this distance. You didn't choose to feel out of sync. It chose you. You watch people move freely through beliefs you can't enter anymore, and part of you misses that ease. You miss certainty that didn't require scrutiny. You miss belonging that didn't demand silence. But those doors don't open from your side anymore. Once you're chosen, the locks change, and you're left standing in a hallway between who you were and who you're becoming, with no comfortable place to sit. Isolation also teaches you discipline. You learn how to be alone without collapsing. You learn how to hold your ground without an audience. You stop expecting understanding and start valuing clarity.